Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rachana Delilam, and this is my group, Tintik and Daniel. Today, we'll be talking about a rather sensitive topic, something that we all have heard about, I'm pretty sure, but it's not something that we really understand, something we don't really know what is really going on in Singapore, and that is domestic violence. Before I go on, I'd like to ask, how many of you knew that October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month? According to the survey that we handed out, 100% of you did not know that it was Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is exactly why we need to talk about it. I mean, we've heard of the word domestic violence, haven't we? But we don't really understand, we don't really know that there's a whole month dedicated just for domestic violence. So what comprises of domestic violence and what it is exactly? Physical injury, sexual assault, direct or indirect threats, social isolation, damage to property, any form of psychological or emotional torment. These are forms of domestic violence. So now that you know what domestic violence is, how serious is it in Singapore? Who does it affect? Well, according to you, 55.6% of those who did our survey think that this is a pretty serious issue. This is heartening to see, because at least you guys know that this is a serious issue in Singapore, and not something that, oh, I've heard of one case or I've heard of two cases. You guys know that this is a serious issue. And just to remind you, every case of domestic violence is very, very serious and should not be taken lightly. So what are the numbers exactly? According to the Ministry of Social and Family Development, a number of helpline calls received from 2016 to 2017 has decreased from about 22,000 to 18,000 over the last year. Well, it seems like a good thing, right? Fewer hotline calls means fewer domestic violence cases. However, I'm sorry to say, but this is not the case in Singapore. According to the MSF again, child abuse cases have increased from 2016 to 2017. The numbers may seem not like very much. However, you need to know that this is child abuse cases, and every case of domestic violence is taken seriously. And especially when it comes to child abuse cases, you should not be playing with the life of a child. So now I would like to talk about the victims and what they need and how we can help them. Safety first. Medical attention is especially important when it comes to domestic violence victims. When they are physically hurt, physically injured, most of them do not seek medical attention. That is very, very dangerous, as it can lead to consequences in the future. Shelters and temporary homes and safe houses. If the victims are not exactly very comfortable to stay with their abusers and they need a temporary place, there are several places in Singapore itself that offer such shelters. Welfare of children. Again, children are very, very important, especially when it comes to cases of domestic violence. Hence, welfare of children is taken very seriously, and MSF usually remove the children from the home if they deem as a home unsafe. Personal protection orders and police reports. You lodge a police report and you subsequently apply for a PPO, and that legally keeps your abusers away from the victim. Support. Now you're physically away from your abuser, but are you really psychologically safe from him or her? Counseling, support from family and friends, support groups and meetings, legal support as well as financial support are just a few of the things that victims do need. Abusers. Sometimes we just concentrate on the victims and not the root of the problem, which is the abusers themselves. So how can we help them, and what do they need? Again, they need support, counseling, support groups, as well as the Batterers in the intervention program, which my group mate Ting will be talking about later. Stability. We can't just help someone at one point and not ensure that this program is not sustainable. So, in order to make sure that they do not fall back to the old habits, we need sustainability as well as a safety net for the abusers themselves. Now, Ting will be talking about the current solutions as well as our proposal.
Thank you, Rachana. I will now take you through what has been done. Locally, the MSF is most involved in campaigning against domestic violence. One notable campaign is Break the Silence, which some of you may have seen on advertisements on YouTube or on public transport. So has this actually been effective? Yes and no. The campaign did successfully promote the role of the community, as seen from the increase in the number of calls being from outsiders, from 1 in 5 to 1 in 3. Yet, according to PAVE, the number of domestic violence cases, as well as their severity, has actually been increasing throughout the years. Here, we can see that the campaign is limited because it only targets the aftermath, which is calling for help after violence has already occurred. Also, we noticed that only physical violence was emphasized. However, as mentioned earlier, domestic violence involves far more than physical violence, includes threats and isolation, which actually do not leave physical marks. Here are some other measures implemented in Singapore. While necessary, these are actually insufficient in themselves. There's also a notable lack of measures in place for abusers, and this can be seen from how only 1 out of the 6 domestic violence organizations in Singapore actually offer counseling services to abusers. Since Singapore lacks solutions for abusers, we looked overseas. In some states, it's actually common for judges to order court-mandated anger management programs. An example we can refer to is Ray Rice, who was charged with aggravated assault after knocking out his wife in the lift. However, according to David Adams, a psychologist and a co-director of Emerge, these actually reflect a fundamental misunderstanding about what abusers need by seeing the problem as anger when it actually is about control. And what else can be done? We believe it to be conversation and mediation. The main issue that is interfering with getting help to victims and abusers is the fact that domestic violence is seen as a private matter that others should not interfere in. But have you ever thought about who is actually paying the price of our beliefs while we sweep the matter under the rug? Through something as simple as talking about it, we can actually create a safe space for people to come forth and seek help. We also need to learn to intervene before actual violence occurs. Therapist Thomas says that domestic violence actually slowly escalates over a long period of time. Imagine the number of people who will no longer have to go to bed in tears if we simply learn to intervene before abusers get out of hand. Some people might say, but we won't make a difference. What difference can we make? I want all of you to imagine this with me. Imagine a door. One person looks away, the door closes a little. Another person looks away, the door closes some more. Do you know that you could very well be that person to close that door on them? Maybe it won't make a difference. Maybe it won't make a difference in the world. You won't. But it will make the difference for them. Oh, but thinking is so troublesome to get involved. But if it's you or your loved ones in the situation today, would this be the kind of response you will hope to receive? Moving on, some people may even say, but if there are measures, why can't they just get help themselves? The thing is, they can't. Victims go through something called trauma bonding that actually makes it hard for them to leave the abuser or to even identify themselves as the victim. Abusers, on the other hand, go through a cycle of rationalization in order to cope with the image of themselves and what they did. They need you. I will now pass on the time to Daniel.
Thank you, Jimmy. I believe what's important now is that we understand how mediation and conversation can positively impact the lives of the abusers as well as the victims before we go about doing that. So, first of all, this is a photo of my team. So I'm a police officer from Geylang PC during my national service. So I've encountered several domestic violence cases, and there was this one particular domestic violence case that impacted me a lot. It involved a fight between a husband and wife. So me and my partner proceeded there, and we learned a lot of disturbing facts about the case. One of which was that, first of all, the wife was so bruised, so beaten up, that half the skin was filled with bruises. It was terrifying to see. But what was the most disturbing was they had a 4-year-old son. 4 years old. And the 4-year-old son witnessed the father strangling the mother on the floor. And can you imagine how traumatized must the son be? So, we learned that they had a domestic helper. And the domestic helper was just secretly sleeping in the room, just quiet, just don't want to get involved. And also, neighbors approached us later on to tell us that, oh, they also heard about the commotion, but nobody mediated. Nobody stepped in and called the police. That is why the son could witness everything. And that is why there's a need to mediate. Imagine this. Imagine how the 4-year-old son could have avoided watching the entire thing if somebody actually stepped in. This is why we need to mediate. And it's as easy as calling the police. If you see or hear a commotion, just call the police. Report it early, and you may just avoid another 4-year-old son from witnessing such a tragedy. Next is conversation. I'm pretty sure everyone of you know about the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why. It talks about suicide. Some people say that the main character Hannah, she was wrong for committing suicide. Some say that she was a hero for committing suicide, so it brings about justice for the police. But then, it's not important who's right or wrong. What's more important is we're talking about suicide, a very sensitive topic. And when we talk about a sensitive topic, we're desensitizing it. And when we desensitize it, it gets better. So there was a helpline in America. The calls tripled by just a month after the show aired. What does it say? Why is it happening? Why is this happening? It's because people are talking about suicide. And because the topic is not sensitive anymore. And when you desensitize the topic, it's easier to step up. Likewise, for domestic violence, we can do the same. Conversation. When we talk about it, we're creating a bridge. We're creating a bridge between us and the victims and the abusers. And when we create this bridge, it assures the victims and abusers that they're not alone in this world, and that we have their backs, and that we are there for them. We can assure them that they're not alone in this problem, and that it is nothing to be afraid about. So, they are not alone. And what we can do is, we can talk about it. So here are some stickers for you to pass on to your friends and families. And these stickers, when you pass on to them, you talk about it. And conversation, when you talk about it, what you do is you tell them anybody can be a victim or abuser, and that we are all unaware of it. And when we talk about it, we are helping to reduce domestic violence. Thank you.
We have ended our presentation. We will now be accepting questions from the audience. Is there any dying question that you would like to throw to us?
Hold on, huh? Okay. 12, 17, 18, and what was the first one? Oh, I'm sorry. 4. Okay. Sorry, just this was 422. 7, and what's the total time? Thank you. Sorry. Can you just do it again? Can you say it again?
Okay, now we have completed our presentation. We'll be opening the floor for questions. Does any of you have dying questions that you are willing to throw at us?
The moment the first question starts, okay. The moment someone speaks, you say, okay, yeah. Okay, my question is to you guys is that have you found out how many of us in this class actually have witnessed any domestic violence in their lives?
According to the survey done, which only 9 people answered, so that's not representative of the whole class for sure. 2 people have actually witnessed or know someone who has been a victim of domestic violence.
Mm-hmm. So my question is that why is it important for this class to know about domestic violence?
It's because that we are unaware of it. So like I said earlier on about conversation, when you talk about it, we are more attuned to people who are experiencing domestic violence. And that way, we can help them. Because right now, we are unaware of it altogether. So talking about it, we can actually be more aware that there are actually people experiencing this. It could be anyone in this class that is experiencing domestic violence and we are not aware of it. Yeah, that's fine.
And I'd like to add on saying that right now we might not know that we might not understand what domestic violence is, or we say, oh, it doesn't affect us because I've never been an abuser or I've never been abused. But you never know what's going to happen in the future. You never know if you are the one who's going to be a victim of domestic violence, whether it's in a relationship or in your family, or you can be the abuser in the end. So in order to make sure you understand it, this is why we want all of you to know and understand how serious the problem is and what the problem is essentially.
Can I ask them? Okay, so basically you're talking about your experiences as a police, right? In the wherever you were in the police force. So but there are some people who find it troublesome to actually go to the police because it's time consuming. So why is it necessary that we still have to mediate?
I think like for us, right, we realize that not enough people are calling the police. So the measures that we have as police officers, where we attend, we have like a protocol to follow. So it could be time consuming for the witnesses to be there. So they probably think it will have this stigma all around that, oh, you're gonna waste a lot of time with the police, you have to write like those statements with the police officers. But then the thing is, if more people actually talk about more people actually report about domestic violence, there are more calls received, and we realize that there's this problem, the issue of witnesses being there for too long. If there's enough statistics, the SPF itself would change the protocols. But then, in order for that to happen, we need to have more people calling the police. And when more people call the police, it gets better for them.
Can I ask though, do you have any ideas what to do if, because I read somewhere statistics that on average a victim will return their abuser like at least 6 or 7 times. Do you have any like thoughts on that or strategies to deal with that if that happens?
Sorry again? Sorry, can you repeat?
Do you have any like thoughts or strategies to deal with that if a victim willingly returns the abuser?
Okay, as I've addressed earlier, this phenomenon is actually called trauma bonding, where because the victims go through something stressful event that initiates this stress hormone called the cortisol, followed by receiving affection, which increases dopamine. So inadvertently, it can become a kind of addiction for them. So the thing about this is, many victims don't see themselves as victims. I'm not sure if any of you have watched it. There was a domestic abuse survivor called Leslie Morgan. She actually said this on a TED show. Even though he held a gun to my head, I never once saw myself as a victim. Instead, I was a very strong woman in love with a very troubled man, and I was the only one who could help him face his demons. And from this, we can see that it's actually very hard for victims themselves to extricate themselves from this toxic situation. And that's why we promote the role of the community. It is important for the community to intervene before the victim gets too deep into the cycle of domestic abuse. If we are able to stop this at the root, then it won't be a slippery slope down for the victims. And they also gain a lot more time to go and seek help, and also for their partners to seek help on salvaging their marriage or salvaging their family. And therefore, this is one of the strategies that we can use for victims who have who go back to their abusers repeatedly.
Anyone else have any other questions?
Do you think like the current mediums for people to voice out about these kind of issues is enough? If not, then what other mediums can be proposed?
Thank you for your question. Mediums as in like platforms,
Yeah.
talking about platforms. Okay, there are online support groups and like physical support groups as well in like organizations like SINDA, MENAKI, CCC, CDC. And what they do is they actually they have like legal help as well as like emotional support and counseling for these abusers as well as the victims. However, I mean, you can see from the statistics itself, it's not enough. It's not really doing much. So that's why we want to like push the community. And I mean, we've heard of a lot of like community-based organizations, you know, like NGOs and everything that, or like non-governmental organizations. So I mean, if by talking about this problem, we might touch someone from the community, and who knows, we can actually establish another more and more platforms and ways to talk about it and help these things. But as of now, there are not enough platforms, and which is a very sad thing to say, but we do need to establish a lot more platforms to talk about this.
Also, to supplement what Rachana has said, we think that having a platform, as in, you don't need a very physical platform such as the internet to talk about it. You can be the medium. You can talk about it, because since like the age of time, what has been the most powerful? The word of mouth. Spreading awareness through each and every one of you sitting here right now. You never know how it could change someone's life one day. So instead of waiting for a platform to come along, you can be the initiators of conversation. And this is the idea that we are trying to promote today.
Okay.
Actually, I have just one question. What if, say, the community does do this role, and they do call the police on a domestic abuser, and say maybe one of them answer the door to the police? What if they refuse them and say, oh, nothing of that sort is going on, they are intent on keeping what's happening within the family? Will you go on to the logical extreme of like saying the community should then get involved themselves? Or what are your thoughts, your like strategy?
Yeah, for me, based on my experiences, there are definitely cases like that where the domestic violence happening in this family, they will keep it to themselves. But the thing is, when the community calls the police, right, every call is being recorded down. And then when we proceed like to a unit, we always ask for past records of this unit. So for a case of like domestic violence, right, there will definitely be more than 2 or 3 calls of this house, and it's across the timeline. So people will know like the facts that, oh, there's actually commotions coming out of this unit, and nobody's doing anything about it. So we actually have community police involved. So they'll frequently like visit the unit to see what's going on. Yeah, so in that sense, the community can still help by calling the police, because all these records, they actually mean a lot to the police, and we can actually understand what's going on. Yeah.
Final question, on the average, how many cases does the police receive in a month on domestic violence in Singapore?
Because domestic violence is a very complex case, because domestic violence is not as simple as people shouting at each other or like people fighting. It can be more complex than an affair can be involved. So for us, we receive domestic violence related cases will be about, let's say, a week could be about 7 to 8 cases.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's actually quite prominent, and it's frustrating for us because people are not calling the police enough. So like, as I mentioned earlier on about the 4-year-old kid, they witness the entire thing. So imagine the 4-year-old watching the father strangling the mother. It's such a tragedy that this happens. So I feel that the community can do way more by being proactive, by calling the police early. And when you report it early, it's easier for us to intervene. Yeah.
Thank you very much.